Hi there, my name is Kenneth Wallace from the Gene Jury in Edinburgh University. Today we are going to be interviewing Sandra. She is a forensic scientist working with the Scottish Police. So, Sandra.
Hi.
What exactly is forensics?
Forensic science is any science to do with the law. That's what makes it forensic. This can include computer crime, drugs analysis, blood pattern analysis, and DNA interpretation.
So why is DNA used? Why is it so special?
DNA is special because it's unique to everybody except identical twins. Identical twins will have the same DNA profile. DNA is found in most cells in the body. The cells that it is found in, that DNA profile will be exactly the same. So we can take a sample from somebody's mouth, or we could take a blood sample, and the DNA profile from both of those would be exactly the same.
If you arrive at a crime scene, where would you be able to, or where would you look for DNA?
Well, at a crime scene we're looking for any cells that may be left at a crime scene that could contain DNA. For instance, at the site of a housebreaking, the culprit may leave a baseball cap, and we would recover that baseball cap and look for any skin cells on that. It's also possible that somebody may drink out of a glass while they're at a crime scene, and we would detect DNA from the rim of that glass.
So when you arrive at a crime scene, what care do you take to make sure that, what care do you take when you take samples?
When we arrive at a crime scene, we have to make sure that we don't introduce any new DNA to that crime scene, either our own or any that we've carried on our clothing. So we have to wear full protective clothing. This can include a scene suit, very nice, it's got a hood and it goes and trousers, all in one. We'd also wear a foot cover on each foot. Some, but not everybody, prefer to wear a mob cap to cover our hair. Okay. We then wear a mask to cover our mouth, like that, and of course gloves.
Okay, so what happens to the DNA afterwards?
Afterwards it's taken to the lab, and in the lab we would remove any DNA from the cells. This can take up to about 3 days, and in that time we would generate a DNA profile. And in a serious crime like a murder, we would obtain reference samples from any witnesses or accused, or even the deceased in this case, and we would compare those DNA profiles to the profile from the crime scene. If we have a crime and there's no accused, then we can obtain a DNA profile from the crime scene, and we could load that to the National DNA database, and then that might hit on the person who committed the crime.
So you mentioned the term crime stain. What is that exactly?
Crime stain is any source of DNA that we obtain from the scene of the crime.
Okay, so that would be like the baseball cap you've mentioned earlier? Or?
Yes, any cells, skin cells shed onto the baseball cap, we would call that a crime stain.
Okay. So what happens when someone is arrested? Would you take DNA from them as well? Or?
Yes, if someone is arrested, a police officer will take a mouth swab from inside the cheek of that person, and that DNA profile would be loaded onto the national database. If that person is then not found guilty of the particular crime they were arrested for, that DNA profile would then be removed from the database.
And could DNA taken from someone be used to convict them?
DNA evidence on its own wouldn't be used to convict somebody. In Scotland you need corroborating evidence, so that would be evidence from, say, an eyewitness or from CCTV cameras taken at the scene.
What exactly is a profile? How does it show DNA?
A profile is something we use to tell people apart. Everybody's DNA is unique, and we only look at a very small part of the DNA profile. It's a bit like a book. If a computer had the first word of every page from a book, that computer would be able to tell you what that book was. So we're actually only looking at a very small part of the DNA. We have it on a graph that looks like this, and you have little peaks on the graph which would tell us who that person is.
So do you take DNA from children as well?
DNA is only taken from children if they've committed a serious crime. We wouldn't take DNA from a child who's committed a petty crime such as vandalism or shoplifting. The criminal age of responsibility in Scotland is 8. So any serious crime committed by a child over the age of 8, a DNA sample would be taken and loaded onto the National DNA database.
How is the DNA database used to catch criminals?
The DNA database can be used in 2 ways. One way is when we get a crime stain and it hits on a person that is on the DNA database. The other way is it can hit against another crime, so we can link a pattern between different crimes. The DNA database can be used for all sorts of crime, from theft to drug dealing to murder. Sometimes we've only caught a murderer because his DNA profile has been on the National DNA database for another crime that he's committed.
So what would make your job as a forensic scientist easier?
It would be easier if everybody's DNA was on the National DNA database. At the moment, if you're found innocent of a crime, your profile is removed. Sometimes it would be handy for us if those profiles stayed, but they don't.
So how would that make your job easier?
It would help because we would get more hits and we would be able to identify both the accused in a crime and potentially identify a victim. If the victim wasn't coming forward, you could identify them by using the National DNA database if everybody's DNA was there.
Okay.
Ethically, the European Court of Human Rights has said that people shouldn't all be on the database, and only those that are convicted of a crime should.
So, do you have a nice story or so just to show the DNA database in action?
Yes, I do. There was this case where we had a gang from Durham coming up to Scotland and committing crimes in quite quiet rural locations. On this particular occasion, they had stolen a car and they kept that in their possession for a number of weeks, and to do that they had changed the number plates. On the day of the crime, they came up to this village in East Lothian, stole a tractor and a pickup truck from a local farm, and they used these to ram raid a cash machine. Luckily a police car was nearby and they made chase. The police car was then knocked off the road by the criminals and ended up in a field, and the gang got away by changing cars. But they'd abandoned their car and we retrieved the car key. From that car key we got a DNA profile that was loaded onto the National DNA database, and we got a DNA hit. When we took that information and other information from Dumfries and Galloway area and other force areas, it's all put together to look up the whole gang.
So Sandra, this has been a very interesting chat, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.